Hey everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today we're going to be talking about setting. Now, setting is a crucial but also often overlooked element of story. But setting also has a huge impact on story. It impacts how it looks, how it feels, how it works. It can impact the theme, it can impact just the logistics of the plot, it can impact the character. Setting plays a huge role in story, and although it's rarely the most important element of story, it's also not something to be overlooked. So how can setting impact the story? First of all, it's through atmosphere and tone. Setting determines how the story looks, and to that effect, how it feels, both to the character and to the reader. Think about books you've read recently. A lot of what you picture when you think about that book is so directly tied to the setting. The setting can leave a huge impression in our minds. You could take the same characters with the same general interpersonal conflict and place them in the downtown of a city, in the middle of a jungle, and in a quaint seaside town. And the story would play out completely differently. It would look different. It would have a very different tone, and the plot would probably evolve in a very different manner as a result. The second way is through conflict. Setting is a great tool for creating conflict, and in a lot of different ways. A character can be in conflict with or because of a setting. Say a character who has just moved to a new city and feels really isolated. This character is in conflict because of their setting. Or a character stranded in the woods with no food, shelter, or way home. This character is in conflict with their setting. But the setting also provides characters with an opportunity to have something to interact with in an individual scene, which can cause conflict on the individual scene level. Say you have a scene set on a farm, and say one day two characters who are in the middle of an argument or important interpersonal conflict stumble upon a stray kind of feral dog in their barn. Now the two characters have to figure out how they're gonna catch this dog and what they're gonna do with this dog. And this can really put tension on the current interpersonal conflict that they're going through amongst themselves. It gives the scene more energy if they have to work through their problem and confront their problem while taming a feral dog than if they were to just kind of sit around and talk about it. The next way is through the plot. Setting can often be a tool for moving the story forward. Now, this might feel most evident in genres like sci-fi or fantasy, because in these genres, elements of the world really dictate the plot's direction and its concept. But even in a contemporary piece, the plot can be driven by the setting. And finally, there's symbolism. The setting can gather symbolic meaning over time based on how characters interact with it or how it reflects the changing dynamics or emotions or ideas within the story. So that said, how do you decide where to set your story? Think about these questions. First of all, just where do you naturally envision scenes taking place? Do you envision a beach? Do you envision a city? What do you just naturally envision when you think about the scene? Next up, think about your plot and ask yourself if there are any specific settings that the plot will require. Is there a scene where you need a hospital? Is there a scene where you need a mountain? Is there a scene where you need a cemetery? You have to think about now creating a setting or finding a setting that has those specific individual locations or qualities. Are there any logistics to consider? Anything even from the weather to the transport system of the city can have an effect on the plot, even if it's just in a small way. Ultimately, you want to choose a setting that's both advantageous to your plot, so it works with all the logistics your plot requires, but that's also fun to describe. So once you've chosen your setting, how do you create a setting that actually works effectively within the story? First of all, use all the senses when describing it. Think about the mood that you want to portray and really lean into the setting to provide that. You also specifically want to think about your character's relationship with the setting and develop it throughout the piece. Does the setting make them feel empowered? Does it make them feel trapped? Is it associated with any specific memories? Are they completely new to it? Do they feel lost? How is the character in conflict with their setting, and what kind of pressure does the setting put on the character? And how can this change and develop over the course of the story as the character develops and as their relationship with this place develops? There's a really great piece of advice that I always think of when I think of setting, and that's to treat setting like a character. In that, in a sense, the setting has its own personality. It almost has its own emotions, and it's kind of like a character of itself. In that way, your main character has a relationship with the setting just like they might have with any other character. You also want to try to vary the individual settings across scenes. You probably don't want to set every single scene in the same room unless that's a specific confine of your book. Say the book is legitimately only set in one room. If that doesn't really have any specific bearing on the plot, try to have characters going to different locations and doing different things scene by scene, especially in a longer piece, to avoid it getting repetitive. When describing scenes, you also want to use specific details. Think about interesting or surprising details that you can unveil about the world. When in doubt, even if it's just kind of a familiar place, One small but interestingly unexpected detail can make a setting seem really interesting. Something strange sitting on the ground, a weird plant that you wouldn't expect, even a bright burst of color in an overall gloomy setting. These things are unexpected, and they can make the setting feel very alive as a result. And finally, choose a setting that gives your characters something to do. Like that example with the feral dog on the farm. That gave the characters something to do within the scene, which made it a very beneficial setting. A blank room with nothing to do probably won't benefit the conflict and the energy of the scenes that much, because characters will have nothing to do but just sit around and talk and think. And that usually doesn't make for very interesting scene work, especially over and over in the span of an entire book. There are, of course, ways to make it work. When in doubt, if there's no specific reason to have the characters in a rather dull, confined setting, it probably makes more sense to put the characters in settings where they have something to interact with. So as a summary, setting can be used to impact a lot of other elements of story. You can use it to create atmosphere and tone, as well as enhance the conflict. It can have a huge effect on the plot, and so you probably want to think carefully about the events that take place in your story and what kind of setting that will require. And as the story goes on, the setting and the character's relationship with the setting can develop more and more symbolic meaning. To create an effective setting, think about how you can describe it in an interesting way, as well as describe it through the main character's lens. So those are some tips for creating setting and for making it work a little more effectively within your story. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.